So, today I'll be talking about the NATO 2024 summit meeting with its lies and false promises, as it seems to be pushing more pro war narratives regarding Ukraine and its expansionist goals than how it was originally designed to be in the late 1940s. So, I have two articles that I will be dissecting and explaining why that is. The first one is going to be from the New York Times, titled US and Allies Aim to Forge Commitments to Ukraine That Will Endure. Oh, that's a beautiful joke. Anyways, so the first section that I will be analyzing for you guys is going to be from what they've wrote. The United States and its NATO allies have agreed that Ukraine should have an irreversible path to membership in the alliance, enshrining the phrase in a document that was released on Wednesday during the Alliance Summit in Washington. When NATO leaders say it's an irreversible path, what they really mean to say is that Ukraine will be so ruined that we will only take what is left, or rather what we have invested in through BlackRock and a plethora of other military-industrial complex companies and etc. In other words, to the last Ukrainian it is, which is very messed up, but you got to understand this is how modern-day politicians and politics have always, I wouldn't say have always, but have been recently been conducted for a very long time. Unfortunately, I digress. The United States was once deeply skeptical about whether Ukraine was ready to become a member, and while questions remain, more and more American and European officials believe that the country will eventually be able to join. This is all talk, if I'm being honest with you, as we all know that Ukraine has a massive corruption issue, as the rich oligarchs in Ukraine just basically hoard all the money that is sent through our tax dollars, mind you, that we have worked for our own roads, for our own transportation services, and just to survive as a country seems to be misplaced here, does it not? One has to ask themselves, how can Ukraine even eventually join if Russia said they will never allow them to join? Just something to think about. That's all I'm going to say on that. And they write, Ukraine's future is in NATO. Members said in a communiqué, adding that we will continue to support it on its irreversible path to a full Euro-Atlantic integration, including NATO membership. Oh my God, these NATO leaders really are arrogant and ignorant, perhaps even both, which is a sad state of affairs of our current leaders within NATO, as they represent the West, and if this is the best we have, then oh my God, that is not good. And they continue to write, documents does not lay out an exact timeline for membership, which the Ukrainians have wanted, but it says the allies will continue to support Ukraine's progress on democratic and security sector reforms. How can you support Ukraine's progress when it seems to be leading to more Ukrainian losses and less democratic policies and more draconian ones? I mean, really, this is why you don't actually see genuine news reporters when these morons speak ignorant talking points and statements. I mean, seriously, we really need them to call them out, or rather fact check them, you know? I digress. US and allied officials say that in any case, a mutual defense clause in the NATO treaty makes it difficult to allow Ukraine in while it is at war. The alliance wants to avoid a direct war with Russia, a nuclear power. The quickest way to end this conflict is by agreeing to all of Russia's terms, if I'm being honest. As the terms to what has been sent multiple times, not just to Ukraine, but to the West, have been fair, I would say. And stop with this obsessive speeches that Ukraine will be accepted into NATO, when this is Russia's, own personal red line in terms of its own national security. And they go on. Some analysts in Washington who have pushed for greater support for Ukraine said NATO leaders needed to give the country concrete benchmarks. I'm curious into what these so-called benchmarks are, to be honest. Seriously, lay them out so we can all see what it is, but clearly they haven't. And they say, obviously, we need to accelerate Ukraine's path, said Alina Polyakova, the president of Center for European Policy Analysis. The problem is we're arguing on the margins over terminology and semantics and not over the bigger strategic objective, which is how to get Ukraine into NATO as quickly as possible. Holy hell, they really want Ukraine to burn, while they sit on the sidelines and pour more gasoline into this conflict. It's funny, they keep ignoring other countries' red lines due to their hubris of having no consequences of their own so-called rule-based order. Though to me, and perhaps many others who see the bigger picture, that pride will be their own downfall and not seeing their own order collapsing underneath them, which we are currently already seeing. The BRICS and China, Russia, North Korea, Iran forming the so-called axes and their alliance system. They continue. Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, urged top diplomats at an alliance meeting in Prague in May to commit to collectively giving Ukraine 100 billion euros in military aid over the next 5 years. Wow, that's... oof. He cannot get a consensus, but officials agreed to give Ukraine a minimum baseline funding of 40 billion euros within the next year. So here's a question for all of you. Where is this money coming from? No, seriously. I know they print so-called unlimited amount of money, but that's the quickest way to default the euro dollar, which would make the euro currency useless if we're being realistic here, which, again, spoiler alert, it already is. They are purposely driving the EU countries' economy into the ground and using Ukraine as a money laundering scheme, which it is to a degree for themselves. Besides, of course, testing their old and new weapon systems there. The second final part that they write. The summit communiqué said that the People's Republic of China had become a decisive enabler of Russia's war against Ukraine through its so-called No Limits partnership and its large-scale support for Russia's defense industrial base. China, if anything, understands where Russia is coming from. However, they also want peace, if anything more than the West. Ukraine has ignored and disagreed with China's peace proposals. As they say, the war must go on, right? And to conclude on their last paragraph, however, there is a spectrum of concern about China among NATO's European members, he added. A minority such as Hungary are actively courting deeper ties with Beijing, while heavyweights such as France, Germany, and the UK are seeking to de-risk their relationship with Beijing, but still remain reluctant to embrace some of the more confrontational aspects of Washington's China's policy. Like I said in one of my previous videos regarding Hungary as president, Orban meeting with Putin and Xi Jinping, that seems to be the most sane course that one would take. Clearly, they don't want to do that. He appears, in my opinion, to be the only sane one, besides Fico, of course, just unfortunately due to his health reasons of having an attempt on his life 2 months ago, is why I'm saying Orban is the one mainly taking the initiative, since Fico physically can't. But just to make that clear, that basically they want peace. Understandable. Now, the last article that I have here is from AP News, titled, Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO, but only after the war with Russia ends. And they started off with, while the leaders stand ready to offer Ukraine, that means to defend itself in a war, now in its third year, nowhere do they say that Ukraine should prevail over Russia. Indeed, their statement said that NATO does not seek confrontation and poses no threat to Russia. We remain willing to maintain channels of communication with Moscow to mitigate risk and prevent escalation. This right here is the most important thing ever that I think people don't want to grasp. Both sides do talk to each other regarding not making this conflict go full fallout as much as possible. And that is very rational to conclude. And this whole we won't speak to the other side is a lie, as you just saw in the article that I gave you. But the point still stands that it's more agreed upon behind closed doors that the Ukrainian-Russian conflict will continue at a steady pace or maybe not. We shall see. And they write, Russian President Vladimir Putin has long bitterly opposed neighboring Ukraine's fight to join the Western alliance, declaring it an encroachment on Russia's security and interests. As he should. This is Russia's Cuban Missile Crisis for them in this current day and age. So let me make an example just so we're clear. So let's say if China were to put its military bases in Mexico and gave Mexico everything it needed to invade or be ready to attack America, do you honestly think the United States is just going to sit there and just watch? Of course not. And so that's what Russia views this conflict as being for them. They digress. Zelensky in Washington for the NATO summit had stressed what he called Ukraine's urgent need for the F 16 fighter jets in a speech to friendly Republican lawmakers Tuesday night. He said his country needed more than 100 to start the counter devastating Russian air attacks on Ukraine's cities, energy infrastructure, and other vital targets. He said Russia was using 300 jets to carry out the attacks. These wonder weapons that these Western military advisors or pundits don't tell you is that besides nukes, nothing will stop Russia, especially the F 16 in this case as well, as we've seen with the M1 Abrams and the Leopard tanks, just to name a few. I think there is a very important question that I've noticed no one ask. Where are these F 16s going to be parked? Bearing in mind that Russia has already destroyed most of these airbase runways and hangars. So, if we use our brains here, the only logical conclusion is that they would have to be parked in either Romania and in Poland, which would push Russia to bomb those bases if the F 16s take off from those bases, which then triggers Article 5 in NATO's doctrine, as we all know. Smart move, but I think it will come down to who will blink first in that kind of situation. And they continue on. Chief of Staff of the Air Force Gen David Alavin just returned from Morris Air National Guard Base in Tucson, Arizona, where the U.S. training is taking place. Of the initial class of 12 Ukrainian pilots, 7 completed training in May, and the remaining 5 are expected to do so in August, Alavin said. It would take more than 2.5 years to even properly get the training necessary in regards to flying a F-16 aircraft. 12 pilots, again, won't change the outcome of this conflict at all. I'm sorry, it just won't. And they go on about the pilots. The pilots have learned to fly the fighter jet and will get follow-on training once they leave the US. But the value of getting Ukraine's F-16 program running is more about long term, he said. I don't know that it's realistic to assume that it's going to be a game changer on the battlefield right now, Alavin said. So they're now even admitting they don't even know if the F 16s will be even a game changer at all. I want my tax money back right now, and I'm being serious. They write, European and U.S. allies have announced other new arms deliveries, such as dozens of air defense systems, including Patriots, this week. Sending more air defense systems that cannot even stop a hypersonic missile is the definition of insanity. That's all I'm going to say. To conclude my final thoughts on the 2024 NATO Summit, NATO is an outdated organization that is clearly run by boomers and neocons that just talk a lot of moronic false plans, ideas, and actions that does not lead to peace or stability at all. And yes, I do know some people are going to say that the countries in NATO are doing fine and are protected. That's very funny. Please take a look at the massive economic and internal security issues these vassal states, yes, and you heard me, vassal states within NATO are having, which is projecting a false picture of how NATO used to be rather than what it is currently. Bearing in mind, it started as a defense pact in the late 1940s to what it currently is as being a expansionist pact, which is not what it was designed for. In my opinion, in order for global peace and economic stability, I think we can agree NATO needs to be disbanded for the good of the world. Other than that, if you have any other opinions or you have any comments regarding this, please let me know in the comments. And if you can please hit that like and subscribe button, I greatly appreciate it. And you guys have a great day. Bye.